Alright everybody, so welcome to our first workshop of the summer. This is going to be all on Unity and how to use it to build just a simple game, gives you a complete overview of everything that you can do within the program, or at least the basics of it. So first off, hopefully everybody downloaded the files that I showed you. You should have Unity, I believe the newest version is 5.1.1. And you should also have a zip file full of graphics that I gave you. There should be a sprite sheet and two other just little random graphics in there. So, first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to open up Unity. So just double click the program, open it up. Let it connect, of course. Alright, and you should get this nice little splash screen. Now I already have a project on there which was me testing out the workshop to make sure it all worked out okay, but you know what, let's actually just start over from the beginning. So right over here you've got a little icon for new project. You're just going to go ahead and click that. We're going to name it something, so I'm going to just call this Workshop1, and you can save it anywhere you like. I always save things under my little Unity projects folder. Makes things a little simpler. Alright, and right down here there should be a 2D and 3D setting. You want to go ahead and click 2D because we're going to be programming everything in 2D today. So just go ahead and hit 2D and then go ahead and create project. Alright, so what you're seeing here is the Unity user interface. And the nice thing about how it's designed is you can kind of move things around any way you like. I mean, if you don't like where things are located, you can take it, drag it, drop it somewhere else. It does not matter. Whatever you want to do with it. So, what we have here, this is the scene view. And the scene view is where you're going to place all your objects into the scene. You can move around with it with your mouse. Right click will let you drag it around. Left click is used for selecting things, and the scroll wheel lets you scroll in and out. Then down here is the game view. What's nice about the game view is that shows you what everything's going to look like to whoever is playing your game. So while you're dropping objects in up here, this will show you down here what it's going to look like to someone who's viewing it. And then up here in this left-hand corner, we have all the different tools you can use. The ones that I find myself using the most often, we have this one here, this little cross-looking symbol. That you would click if you want to move things in the scene view. And then this one right here, the box with the arrows pointing out from it, that allows you to scale something, to make it bigger or smaller. We'll get to those in a minute because so far there's nothing in the scene view. Now right here we have the project tab. This one has all of the assets you have for the project, which currently is nothing, but in a minute we will have quite a few. And then over here to the right we have the inspector. That's where all of the information for whatever object you're selecting comes up and allows you to tweak different things for the object. Down here is the hierarchy, and that is where all of the objects within a scene are stored. So each one is going to show up in that little area, and you can tell which objects are in a scene, which ones are related to other objects, things like that. Down here is the console, which will show you different error messages and notifications based upon what's going on. And we also have the Animator and Animation tab, which we'll come to later when we're actually working on that. So, first off, we need a scene. And we kind of have one, but we haven't saved it as anything yet. So, what we want to do is in our project folder, you have this assets folder, and we're going to make a new folder within it. Okay, we're going to just create folder. You just want to right-click assets, create, and then hit folder. And we're going to name the folder scenes. So you can create multiple scenes within a game. We're only going to be creating one today, but if you were creating a game with multiple levels, each level would be a scene, and then scenes would also be things like your main menu, your level select screen. Anytime you're changing to an entirely different area, it is usually a scene change. So, the scene we're currently on, we're going to save. So you want to go to File and Save Scene. Well, Save Scene As. You're going to go into that scenes folder you just created, and we're going to name it something. So, level 1, I guess. Great. And if you go back to the project folder now, you have within scenes level 1. So if you ever need to change scenes, you would go here, you would double click whichever scene you want to go into, and it would take you there. Since we're only going to be in level 1 the whole time, there's not going to be a lot to it. Alright, so now we want to actually start building our level. So first off, let's make a platform. So we're going to go up here, there's a tab for game objects. Everything within Unity is a game object, anything in your scene, and those are what get messed with. So under game objects, we have 2D object, and in 2D, everything is a sprite. That just means it doesn't have any kind of 3D form, it's like a flat piece of paper. And we're going to just drop that sprite right into the center of the scene. And you can see that we have this little square here. That is the sprite, there's just no image for it. So I can pick it up and drag it, but if I were to click away from it, you wouldn't be able to see it anymore, because there's no image. However, it's still down here at the bottom in the hierarchy. There's a little thing that says New Sprite and allows me to select it again. Now first off, this is going to be a platform, so we're going to name it Platform. And I would recommend naming it Platform spelled exactly like that with a capital P and everything, because later on we're going to have to tell the code to look for something called Platform, and if you spell it differently, it's going to really screw everything up. So, now we've got the object, it's still invisible, you still can't see it, so let's give it some kind of sprite image so that it's visible. So right over here, I'm sorry, I did that quickly. Under this sprite renderer thing in the inspector, there's a section called Sprite, and that's the image that the sprite has. And if you click this tiny little circle to the right of it, it opens up a list of all the graphics that we have. Now right now we haven't imported any of the graphics that I gave you, so we're just going to pick something standard for it. Let's go ahead and use that UI sprite right there. Yeah, UI sprite looks good. And it is actually there now. It's really small, but it's there. So we're going to make it bigger because we don't really want it to be that small. So over here under Transform, Transform deals with, as you can tell, the position, the rotation, and the scale of the object. And we want to make the scale quite a bit bigger. So we have X, Y, and Z. The Z isn't going to matter too much because we are in a 2D plane, so X and Y dimensions matter. The Z is into or out of the screen, and that usually only comes into play when we're dealing with layering things on the screen. So let's go ahead, we're going to change the Y value to a little bit bigger because we want it to be thick enough that we can see it. Let's go with 4. 4 looks pretty good. And if you look down in the game view, you can see it's visible now. And we want it to be a lot longer than that, so let's do about 100. That looks pretty good. You know what? Bit big. How about we do 60? There we go. So that is a platform. And it's just going to sit there. The only thing about this is that platform, if we wanted to make another one, we would have to make it completely from scratch. And that doesn't sound like fun. So you know what? If you go up to this project folder, we're going to make a new folder, and we're going to name it Prefabs. And what a prefab is in Unity, you can actually make a template for a particular game object, and you can just drag and drop them back into the level. So if there's something you're going to have to use more than once, such as a platform, if they're all going to be the same, it's easier to just make a template and drag them in every so often. So we're going to open up the Prefabs folder. You're going to take that platform from your level hierarchy and just drag it directly into the Prefabs folder. And there it is. And you'll notice it turns blue in the hierarchy, meaning that it is linked with that prefab. So if you were to change settings in the prefab, it would change it for all of the platforms within the hierarchy. So we have a platform, and why don't we go ahead, here, I'm going to move this a little bit. Oh, there we go. That's a good spot. And there we go. Much better. So we're actually going to move those platforms into the scene. So we already have one. Let's stick another one in there. Alright, and just to avoid any issues, there's something new with Unity 5. When you drop a prefab in there, it adds a number so you can tell them apart. We don't really need to tell them apart, but we are going to need to access them by name. So go ahead and rename platform to platform. Get rid of that little 1 in parentheses. They all need to be called the same thing so that we can refer to them all as a single object. Alright, so we have platforms, hooray. Now we need a character. So this is about the time that we're going to want to have some graphics. So let's create another new folder, and we're going to call it graphics. And I can't spell. There we go. So we have a graphics folder, and now things are going to get a little tricky because we're going to have to go outside the Unity interface. I want you to open up whatever folder you saved that zip file to. And I have them under my pictures, so I don't need to worry about that. No, wait, I have them over here. Alright, so I have these 3 images right here, and what you're going to do is you're actually going to drag those directly into the project. So what you want to do is wherever you have your Unity project saved, you're going to navigate to that area. So remember how I told you I saved all of my games that I build in my little Unity projects folder? You're going to navigate to that location, you're going to open up the project, you're going to open up the assets folder, and there's that graphics folder that we just created. So you're going to open that, take any of the images you want, and drag them right in. And now if you were to close out of all of this and open your graphics folder in Unity, there they all are. Now, the character we're using is actually Donkey Kong, and right now it's contained on a sprite sheet. It's not a single image, it's a bunch of images, which you probably saw. Now, if you click that sprite sheet in the graphics folder, you'll notice there's all these settings over here in the inspector. And there's Sprite Mode. Now, right now, the game is treating it as though it's a single image, which it is not. We need it to be multiple images. So you're going to change that single to multiple so that it knows that this is a sheet, not a single image. And then you're going to go over to the sprite editor right here. Go ahead and hit apply for that. So, now we have all of the images of Donkey Kong. And up here in the left-hand corner, you'll notice there's a slice button. You're going to click that, and it does this automatically. There's some times where you would rather do it yourself, but it's much easier just to let Unity take care of things for us. When you hit slice, it's going to cut all of these images out of the sprite sheet. And it's being difficult. Yeah. I actually have no idea if that worked. Let's find out. Close this. Okay, so that is not working. Give me just a moment. Weird. Okay. Well, if it worked out for you, this little arrow right here in the project folder, if you click that arrow, it should extend down, and there should be about 12 sprites on there. Like I said, it's not working for me, and I'm not quite sure why, but as long as you've got it, that's really the important thing. Okay, well, whatever. I'm just going to use something else then, because this doesn't seem to be working out for me. And I'll just jump over to the previous workshop I did later to show you guys the animation in a minute. So for the moment, I'm going to use something completely different. Let's use a different image. Okay, so sorry about all that wasted time. Let's do this again. Alright, so now I have just an image, not an animation. Let's just do it this way. Okay, that should do the trick. So now we have Donkey Kong. I know he has a weird white background. Normally, with any other kind of thing that you would put into Unity, it would have a alpha channel in the background, which causes it to be transparent, like this guy. How he doesn't have any sort of square around him. That's easily fixable in any sort of paint program, but I don't want to waste time doing that right now because I've already wasted a bunch of time screwing around with things. So, we have a character. And what we're going to do with him is, first off, if I start this level, these buttons up here allow you to test it. If I test the level, you'll notice that absolutely nothing happens. And that's because right now he's just an image. He's not a character. So, what we need is we need to give him some sort of physics. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to, right here, if you've selected DK, over here in his inspector, we have the components, and you're going to add a component, which in this case is going to be physics, and you need it to be physics 2D, because again, we're working in 2D. And you're going to go ahead and give him a circle collider. It's going to be a little awkward because in this case he's shaped like a box, but in most cases the character uses a circle collider because their body is roughly circular. It creates a zone around them. And also, if you ever needed them to do something like climb stairs, then they don't collide with each step. They kind of roll off of them. So, give him a circle collider, and now you're also going to give him something to give him actual physics. So you're going to give him a rigid body, 2D. And the rigid body 2D is telling it that this is something that should run under Unity's physics. So this is what causes him to move like an object. And you'll notice if I start the level now, he falls. Which is a good sign, because it means that gravity's actually working. The bad news is the platforms don't do a damn thing, because they are still just images as well. So we're going to go to the prefabs for the platform. Not the platform itself, because we want to do this to all of them. Add a component, physics 2D, and they're going to need a collider as well. And we're going to use a box collider for them because they're roughly rectangular. Oh, that's right, there's issues with this. Hold on. Never mind. Remove that component. You're going to need to do it in one of the platforms in the scene to physically see this. So just pick a platform in the scene, hit physics 2D, give it a box collider, and now you can actually see that collider around it. It creates a green box. See that? That is its collider. Now, it's the only one that has one right now. The one down below DK does not. So what you want to do is you want to take that platform, the one that you added the collider to, and move that up and overwrite the previous prefab with it. So now all the platforms have colliders. Makes it nice and simple. Alright. And the platform is going to need a rigid body as well. So we're probably going to have to do the same thing I just did with the collider here. Just physics 2D, rigid body 2D. And we don't really want these to fall. We don't want gravity to take effect because that's not a very fun game right there. So what we want to do is right here there's a little checkbox that says is kinematic. And what that means is that it will be unaffected by collisions and applied forces. So if you click that, now it doesn't move. And you'll notice that DK is actually landing on those platforms now. So I believe actually the prefab worked, but just to be safe, let's go ahead and just take the one that we've been making alterations to and overwrite the prefab. There you go. So now he can land on these platforms. The downside is he can't move, and that's not really what we want going on. So, what we're going to do here, hold on, let me try and resize this a bit. No, never mind. So, what we're going to do here is we need to give the player a script. And once again, we're going to want to create another folder for this, so we can keep everything separate. Make a new folder, call it scripts. There we go. And we're going to open up scripts and create a C# script. You can do it in C# or JavaScript. They're both pretty simple. I'm going to do C# because I'm more familiar with that, and that's what we were using for our project. So, and you can call it anything you like. I'm just going to call it player, so that we know that this is what's controlling the player. And if you double-click that, it will open it up in Unity's scripting program, which is called MonoDevelop. Okay, so now you'll notice we have two different methods here. There's a start method and an update method. And if you don't know what a method is, it's a block of code in any kind of programming language that can be called at any time. So something in the game could call that block of code and it would run everything within those brackets. So start and update are both methods that are specific to Unity. Start automatically gets called at the beginning of whatever object it's attached to. So if something was created, when it gets created, start runs immediately. If it's already in the level when the level starts, it runs at the beginning of the level. Update, on the other hand, is called once per frame. And if you consider that a lot of games run at 30 or 60 frames a second, it's running an awful lot. So you put things into update that you want always to be taking place. Now, first off, what we want for the player is we want it to move. So we need to create some variables that'll allow you to hold different values. And we need the character to have a speed. So we're going to go ahead and say, there's different keywords used in most programming languages. Public means that the value can be accessed by other scripts. So if I declare it as public, a different object could access this information. If I declare it as private, then only this particular script can access this information. You can't change it from another one. So we're going to public, and it's going to be a float type. And a float is kind of like an integer, except, actually it's nothing like an integer, it's a decimal. But it's a value that we can change at any time. And it's contained within a certain amount of space. If you wanted to use really, really big numbers, you'd use something like a long, but in this case, float will work perfectly fine because we're using small numbers. And we're going to call it speed. And we're going to set it equal to 0, and you have to put that little f after it just so the program knows that this is a float value. So right now its speed is 0, and we can change that later if we need to, but at least we have something that we can access now for speed. Okay. And since we want the movement of the character to be something that's always active, we want your controls to always work, you're going to store all the code which activates its movement in the update method, so that no matter when you press a button, that code is running. So, what we're going to do is we're going to make a couple more variables. Actually, I think we just need one here. And we're going to call this moveX. And I'm going to make this private, so you can see how that works. And that's going to start off at 0 as well. Now what moveX is going to be is that's going to be the direction that we're moving, because Unity stores a lot of different controls in its inputs. So its input could be the mouse, it could be the WASD keys, it could be a joystick, and it has things that are already assigned within the program. So if we were using the WASD keys, which we are, the A button would be a negative input, and the D button would be a positive input, because it's sending it in different directions on the X axis. So 0 would be right in the middle. That would be no movement. So what we want to do is, within the update method, we want to call moveX and set it equal to input. And then dot get axis, which is going to retrieve the value of whatever axis the player is inputting. And we're going to call that, put it in quotes, and horizontal. Wow, I can't spell. There we go. So what you have there, because Unity already has inputs within its program, horizontal is the name of a particular set of inputs that it has, which includes the A and D keys. So now we don't have to worry about assigning those keys separately. It's already built in. So right now, if I were to press the A and D keys while the game was running, it wouldn't show anything, but move X would be changing between -1 and +1. And if I wasn't pressing anything, it would revert back to 0. Alright, so that... One second here. Alright, and now what we want to do is we want to actually make those values move the character. So, the character has a rigid body on it. We already talked about that. That is what causes the character to have physics. So when we're moving the character, we're not actually moving everything, we're just moving that rigid body. So within the code, you're going to call getComponent, which is a Unity command that pulls the component off of the object that this script is attached to. And then in brackets, you're going to put rigid body 2D. So that's going to pull the rigid body component from the player. And you need to put parentheses. It just has to do with the way it's formatted. Then dot velocity. So this is actually going to change the velocity of the rigid body. And we're going to set that equal to, and it's going to be a new vector2. And what a vector2 is, within Unity, everything is moved on vectors. So it has a direction with a particular magnitude, just what vectors are. And there's vector 2s and vector 3s. We're going to be using vector 2s because we are in 2D. So once again, we don't need to worry about the Z direction. You actually can use vector 3s in 2D. It's just not necessary. So we don't really need that. And inside these parentheses here, it's expecting some parameters. There's some values that have to be passed to a vector 2 for it to exist. And it needs an X and a Y value. So the X value, we want to be the direction the player is pressing. So if you already know that if the player presses A, it's going to be a negative value, and if you press a D, it's going to be a positive value, then we're already getting the proper direction. We just need a particular magnitude to go along with it. So what we're going to do is for the X value, we're going to type out move X times the speed. And so that'll give us the direction the player is pressing, and it'll go at the speed that we've assigned it. And then we also need a Y value, so you put a comma. And you just want to go ahead and... This one we don't want to change. We don't want to mess with the particular character's Y value. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just call getComponent, rigid body 2D, velocity. You can just copy this whole thing and stick it right over here. And then dot Y. So it'll end up having the same velocity it already has. So you don't want to mess with its Y component at all. And by the way, I didn't mention this because it's something that I forgot that people might not know if they haven't done programming before. Every line here needs to have a semicolon at the end. If you don't, you're going to get errors. And it's seriously irritating. It's the kind of thing that'll happen to programmers all the time. So, go ahead and add one of those there. And be sure you're saving your code, because you don't want to have to do this again later. So just Control S every so often. So what we have now should be basic moving code. Let's see if that works. So close this up. Oh, one thing that we need to do before we actually run the level, we just made a nice script there, and it's not attached to the player. It doesn't do anything, because it's not on that object. So what we want to do is right down here, make sure your player is selected, hit Add Component, Scripts, and there's that player script. So just go ahead and attach that. And you'll notice that speed, since it's a public variable and not a private one, it can be assigned in the inspector. So let's just change it to something different. Let's call it 5. And theoretically now, if you start the level, you can move. Except you're rolling. And there's a reason for that. It's because we haven't prevented the player from rotating. Up here in... where is it? Oh, I'll come back to that. I know it's here. I'm just having a mind blank. Anyways. Okay, well, whatever. So the player moves. That's really the important thing. Yeah, it's really strange. There used to be a component within Rigid Body which would allow you to fix the angle, and I'm not seeing that. So, once again, this is an issue of Unity 5 messing with me. Actually, here we go. It's under Constraints, so they moved it. Right here under Rigid Body 2D Constraints, there's Freeze Rotation, Z. Check that, and I believe that should fix everything up very nicely. There we go. And now you just slide back and forth, which is what we want. Okay. So, now that we've got that, it'd be kind of nice if the player could jump, because we do have platforms, you need to be able to navigate from one to the other. So, we're going to create some jumping code. So first off, we need to check if the player is actually touching a platform, because if we don't check that, the player will be able to jump in midair, and could theoretically fly, because they could just keep hitting jump. So, what we're going to do is we need to create a Boolean variable, so go ahead and open up the code again. And what a Boolean is it's a type of variable that can only have 2 states. It can be either true or false, nothing else. So right here in the code, we are going to go ahead and make that. Okay, so and to create a Boolean, you call it bool. That's how it recognizes it. And we're going to call this isGrounded. And we want to set it equal to false at first, because the player starts technically in midair. They're just a couple in, well, actually they're quite a ways off the platform. And so at first, it's false. The player's not touching anything, and it prevents them from jumping at the very beginning of the game. So, that's the Boolean that we needed. Now, what we need to do after that is we need to create a set of code that will activate if the player presses the buttons that you want. So, right in the update method again, because we want you to be able to jump at any time, assuming you're touching a platform, we're going to go ahead and create an if statement. So, an if statement is a statement that will only run if whatever is within those parentheses there is true. So we have a little block of code here. It's encased by brackets again. And right here in the parentheses, we're going to put 2 different things that need to be true for this to run. So if the input dot get key, and we're going to call keycode dot W, which in Unity means anytime the player presses W on the keyboard. So this is going to be our jump button. And to combine 2 different statements together within any kind of programming, you would use 2 ampersands. So that's programming's way of saying and. And then you would also type in isGrounded. So what this is saying is if the player presses W, and if isGrounded is true. I could also type it out like this, but this works just fine. That's its way of saying isGrounded is true. If you want to say check if grounded is false, you would put an exclamation mark, which stands for not. So we're not going to do that because we want isGrounded to be true. And then right inside these brackets here, we are going to go ahead and we're going to get the component again, Rigid Body 2D, because that's what we need to move. And this time we're going to call add force, which just pushes the character. Now we need to tell it which direction. So it's actually going to take a couple of parameters here. The first one's going to be a vector 2 to tell it which direction to go. So we're going to say add force, new vector 2. You're going to get the component of the rigid body 2D. So that right there is kind of like what we did down here with the velocity. I don't want to change the x's velocity. So right here, that's just going to take whatever velocity it already has. And then for its y component, we're going to call it jump force. This is actually something I forgot to do. We need to have another variable for that. So right up here, we're going to make another variable. Make it public so we can change it later. And start it off at 0 again. Ah! There we go. So as of now, you have no jump force, but we can fix that later. Oh, and I forgot the parentheses down here. Like I said, they're important. So, we have that now. And then also, after jump force, we need to add another bit of code, force mode 2D dot impulse. And so that right there will cause the player to jump. The problem is right now nothing is changing that Boolean because it's just going to stay false forever. So if it were true, the player could jump, but that's not going to help us very much. So to start with, before we start messing with making it true, if the player were to jump, we don't want them to jump again. So within the code for jumping, right here, we're going to go ahead and say is grounded equals false. So when the player jumps, it sets is grounded back to false because they're no longer grounded. They're in the air. Now it's time to change that Boolean. So what we're going to do is down here, we're going to make another method. We're going to call it, this is another method that's built into Unity, so I'm not just making this up, it's already in there. We're going to call it on collision, enter, and 2D, because once again it is in 2D. And make sure that the D is capitalized. That has thrown me off a few times. And some methods expect something to be passed to it. This is going to be one of those methods. So it's expecting a collision parameter. It's going to access the object that's colliding. So within those parentheses, you're going to type out collision, 2D, and just name it something. I'm going to name it COL. And once again, we need to give it some brackets, or curly braces rather, to contain all of its information. So right now what that method does is anytime the player has something enter its circle collider, it's going to pass the information of whatever collided with it to the player's code. So what we need to do is we need to test what the player collided with. So we're going to do another if statement, and if the collider dot game object, so we're actually accessing the object itself, dot name equals platform. And that's why I was saying we needed all those platforms named very specifically so that things would work out. And one other thing I should point out, you'll notice I used 2 equal signs there. Within code, a single equal sign does not mean equals. It means set this to. So like up here where it's speed equals 0, that's setting the speed to 0. When you're testing to see if something is equal to, then you would use 2 equal signs. That's checking the value. Alright, so we have this if statement. We need to create a block of code for it. So once again, some curly braces. And so if the collider is a platform, all we have to do is grounded becomes true. So now, anytime the player collides with a platform, is grounded becomes true. If they jump, is grounded is set to false, so they can't jump anymore. So all that code should cause the player to jump properly. But I need to change the jump force first. Forgot about that. Let's see, what should we set that to? How about 9? 9's a pretty good value. Let's see if that works. So now if I press up on the W key, Donkey Kong jumps. Woo! A little floaty, but at least it works. That's the important thing. Alright, so now we technically have a somewhat playable game. So now we need to actually create something in the level so that it does something. So how about we start creating some enemies? So first off, these graphics I can actually use because they're not a sprite sheet. We're going to pull one of these enemies in there. So first off, game object, 2D object, sprite. We now have a new sprite that looks like that enemy, because I was selecting the enemy when I said new sprite. And we're going to name him something. Let's just name him enemy. And there he is. And once again, you can click this cross sign to move him around if necessary. Let's stick him over here in a place where he's going to do the least damage for the moment. Alright. And right now he doesn't do anything, but he will in a minute. The problem is if he were to kill you, nothing would happen. I mean, we could make it delete the player, but then we just be looking at a screen full of images and we wouldn't understand what had happened. So let's actually create a game over screen so that you can get a game over in this game. So once again, go to game object, and there's a whole section of UI, user interface objects, and under there, most user interface objects are contained within a canvas. So we actually need a panel, and it'll create the canvas for us. See how that panel is contained within the canvas. And if I zoom out here, that canvas and the panel in it, that gray stuff, is huge. It's way bigger than the level. But that's not a big deal, because you'll notice right here, it's not even on top of our characters. But down here in the game view, it's covering everything. The canvas is actually set to automatically center itself over the screen at runtime, which is really convenient. So we now have a panel, and let's name it Game Over so we actually know what it is. Okay, so we should have that nice little Game Over panel there. And we want it to actually look like a Game Over panel. So go down to your hierarchy, select Game Over, right-click it, go to UI again, and hit Text. And that will add a text object inside the Game Over object. And you can actually see it down here. And if you zoom way out, you can see it here too. Now, I'm going to center it. So right here you've got all your nice little font settings. So I'm going to center it. I'm going to set it to much bigger so we can see it. And I'm just going to type out Game Over as the text that it has. So now, that's a pretty sufficient Game Over screen for the moment. I'll go ahead and save things. I don't want it over my screen all the time though. And the nice thing is you can actually deactivate things within your scene. So right here, if I go to the Game Over panel, you'll notice there's a little checkbox right up here. They don't really tell you what it is, but if you uncheck that, it makes that object inactive within the scene. And unless something activates it, it might as well not exist. So when I click that, now it's gone. Play the level, it's not there. Nothing to bug you. Now what we want to do is we want to make it so that if the player touches that enemy, it causes that panel to go active. So, first off, there needs to be a way to collide with the enemy. So, click on the enemy, add a component, and once again, we're going to do Physics 2D, and add a circle collider. Okay. So now, if you look close to that enemy, there's that little green circle. If you pass within that green circle, it will trigger a collision. Alright, now what we need to do is we need to have the player know whether or not it hit an enemy. So once again, we're going to open up the player script, almost all the scripting we're going to do is within, in fact, I think all the scripting we're going to do is within the player today. So we'll make things nice and simple. We need to be able to access that panel. So we're going to create another variable at the top, and it's going to be a public game object. So this one isn't just a number, this is actually a whole game object variable. And we're going to call that game over panel. Okay, and of course the semicolon there. So now we can refer to this game object within the player's code. It doesn't mean anything right now, because even though we have a game over panel, there's nothing connecting the code with the actual panel in the scene. We'll do that in a minute, though. So for the moment, we have the game over panel, and then we need to create, within the collision, right here, we have that on collision enter, because something else can collide with the player that's not a platform. So just copy this code and paste it right underneath. And we're going to say if the game object is named enemy instead of platform. So now if it hits something that's named enemy, and what we want to do is we want to take the game over panel up here, and we're going to set it to active. So we're going to do game over panel dot set active is true. So now if the player collides with an enemy, it will activate that panel. And let's see if that works. Jump right up here, we have an enemy, and there we go. And we notice we're getting an error down here. The game over panel of player has not been assigned. That's what I was talking about with the two not being connected, because everything within the player's code should work right now, but if you look right down here, if we click on the player and scroll down to the bottom, there's now an empty slot right here for game over panel. It's expecting an object, but it hasn't been given one. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the hierarchy, grab that game over panel, and just drag and drop it right in there. So now the player understands which object you're trying to access. So if we run the level again and do the same thing, bonk, and there is your game over. Currently we don't have any way of resetting it or anything like that, and you can still move because we haven't prevented the player from moving, but at least now it gives you a notification that you lost. And we're going to take that enemy and just drag him up into the prefabs as well, because we might want more enemies later. And once again, if you drop any more enemies into the level, be sure to name them something else. Well, name them the same thing to get rid of that one, because the player's code is looking for something specifically named enemy. So if you don't name it enemy, it won't have any clue what it's hitting. Put these guys over here. That's just a dangerous spot now. Okay. So now we can get a game over. Let's add something that's actually positive to this game. So we need some sort of bonus that you can use. So I also had another graphic here. It's a banana. So once again, we're going to do game object, 2D object, sprite, and we have a banana. Set that right down here. And it's going to need all the same stuff that we've done before with the enemy and that sort of thing. So let's name the sprite banana so we actually know what we're accessing. Perfect. And now let's make another panel that handles when you win. And I've decided that the win conditions for this game are going to be if you pick up all the bananas. So right here, the canvas can contain all sorts of things, and it can have more than one panel. So we're going to right-click canvas, give it another UI panel, and this one we're going to name victory. So there it is. All right, and now we want to give that one some text as well. So UI text, and I'm going to make that, well, once again, center it, make it bigger. And it's going to say victory with some exclamation marks. And once again, because we don't want it on the screen at all times, we are going to deactivate it. Great. Okay. Okay, now we need the banana to be able to collide, just like the enemies. So once again, pick a banana, add a component, physics 2D, circle collider 2D. So now the banana can be collided with. And what we want to do here, close that up a bit. What we want to do here is we want to make it so that, once again, in the player's code, it knows what to do if it hits a banana. Now, if the banana isn't just going to immediately make you win the level, we need to make it so that there's something counting how many you've eaten. So, what we're going to do is we're going to make another variable. And this one, actually, we're going to make two. Let's make some room for them. So the first one is private float. And this is going to be the number of points that the player has. And we're going to start it off at 0. And it can be private because we're never going to need to change the amount of points the player's had anywhere other than within this code. Because we don't want to suddenly set the player to 5 points at the start of the level. They don't have any points because they haven't picked anything up. However, this one we want to make public. This is going to be max points. And I'm going to make that be 5 by default, but honestly we can reset it because it's going to be in the inspector. And what max point is going to be is, I'm going to call it max points just so I don't confuse myself. Max points is going to be the number of bananas in the level. It's not going to assign itself though, so make sure that however many bananas you put into the level, you set max points to be the same amount. So, now we have those. Down in the collision again, we are going to add some more colliding code. It's going to be just like the previous two, so grab block of code, paste it in, and if the collider is named banana, and if that's the case, once again we're going to want to mess with a panel. I forgot to add the panel in at the top here. In fact, why don't we do that now? Well, there's going to be another panel, so public game object, and we'll call this one victory panel. So now we can access that. Down here, instead of calling GameOverPanel.setActive, we're going to call VictoryPanel.setActive. So now that will cause the victory panel to come up. Oh, actually, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. That is what we want to happen when all the bananas are gone. So, you know what? Let me delete that. Actually, all we want to happen when you collide with a banana is we want to increase your points by 1. So, we're going to do points, and you can either do points equals points plus 1, like that, which means that they're going to take the value of points, add 1, and assign it to points. Or if you want to do it the short way, you can just do 2 plus signs. That just means increase points by 1. Alright, so now that we have that, we also don't want that banana to stick around, because you can just keep picking up the same banana until you win. So we're going to say destroy, and col, which is what I named the colliding object up here, dot game object. And so what that code will do is when you collide with an object, if the object's name is banana, it will destroy that object. So now you can only pick it up once. And then we want to put some code that checks what your point amount is at. So what we're going to do is write up in the update code, and once again it's got to be an update because we need this code to always be running active. We are going to check how many points you've received. Okay, so we're going to put another if statement, and if points, not pints, points, equals max points. So if your points value has reached the max points value, and it's going to run this code right here, and it's going to do exactly what I mistakenly did earlier. It's going to activate the victory panel. So it will set active victory panel. Alright, so where we are right now, everything should run properly. The problem is I've assigned 5 bananas to be the victory condition, and there's only 1 banana. So once again, let's make a prefab for the bananas. We're going to take that banana, drag it into the prefab, and then we're going to add a bunch of those. So let's just copy that banana and paste it. I messed that up. That's okay. Copy, paste. So now we have 5 bananas. And once again, rename them all, because if you leave it like that, you won't be able to pick them up. Or maybe you will. I'm actually not sure. Haven't tested it, but better safe than sorry. Okay, so now we have 5 bananas in the level, and supposedly if you pick them all up, you'll win. Now, these bananas are all at the exact same location as the first one, so let's kind of move those around a bit. Just take these and scatter them. And we don't want to put it too close to these guys because they do kill you, so we'll move them away for now while we're testing things. And this is going to be a very simple level, as you can tell, but that is okay. We can disperse things a bit later. So look at that. 1 banana gets deleted automatically when you land on it. You can move around, you can pick up the rest. And we pick that last one up. And once again, the variable is unassigned, which is not what we want. So once again, now that's a lot of errors. We're going to click the player, and there's an empty slot for victory panel. So under the canvas, you're going to take that victory panel, drag it right into that spot, and the level should run properly now. And there's your victory. So now the game is pretty much playable. There are a few more things we're going to want, though. So, we want the camera. The camera right now is in a stationary spot, and it makes the game feel rather small. And what we kind of want the camera to do is follow the player. So if you take main camera and you drag it down and drop it right on top of your player in the hierarchy, it will actually make your camera a child of the player. And child objects are associated with their parent objects. So they will follow them around, and they can access each other's code in certain ways. We don't really need to worry about code, because all we needed to do is follow the player. So that's already doing everything we need it to. However, it's going to start from its current position, and we want it to always be centered on the player. And it now refers to its position based upon its parent, which is Donkey Kong. So its position, we want to be 0, 0 in the transform. And once you've done that, it's now perfectly centered on the player. So if you begin the level again, now we have a functional side-scroller. And those still kill me, but that's okay. So at this point, you could build this level as big or as small as you want. So you can take platforms and drag them in from other areas, and you can start extending things. You can put in more enemies. You can put in more bananas, but if you do, you're going to want to make sure that you increase the level cap, which is on the player here. So you'd want to change the max points to however many bananas you added. Can't quite make that jump from the looks of it. And this is where better level design comes in. But that's okay. So now you can see you can build all sorts of things with this, and there's still plenty of room. Now, I did want to show you guys some animation as well, but obviously it's not working out too well, so let me switch over to the test workshop that I was running before, and I can kind of show you what I did so you can see where that went. So I'm going to switch to a completely different project. You can still do this within your own, especially if the sprite sheet actually worked out for you. If it didn't work, I'm sorry. I don't quite know what went wrong there, but it'll be okay. You can still understand from what I'm doing here. Alright, so this was the one I was working on before, and obviously it looks a little nicer because I actually have that sprite sheet functioning. And if you notice in my graphics folder, that DK sprite sheet, if I open it up, we have all these frames. So that's what happens if it actually slices correctly. Once again, I don't know the problem, but it's probably something pretty minor and pretty stupid, like most programming problems. So, we have all these sprites. When we first dropped the player into the level, you should have assigned one of these sprites to it. And even though they're all within that sprite sheet, because they've been broken up, you can open up this and pick out whichever one you want to be its stationary sprite. So, you didn't really miss a lot there. Now, if we want to animate it, this is where things get a little trickier. So we have all these, and we have these two tabs here, Animator and Animation. So first off, you need to make sure the player is selected. If you don't have the player selected, the animation tab won't work. Or it'll work, but for a different object if you have a different object selected. So you click the Animation tab, and it says Animating Player, Create an Animation. So if you hit Create, then you have an animation you can work on here. I've already made two. There's standing and walking, but I'll go ahead and just make a new one so I can show you what I mean. So you hit Create New Clip, and it's going to save it somewhere. I was saving it under a graphics folder. Sometimes we use a folder that's specifically for animation. It's really up to you, but it's going to save a .anim file, which is just going to store that animation. So maybe I'll try making a jumping one. I don't know. We're going to save that. Okay, and now we're within the jumping animation. There's no frames though. So what you actually want to do is you want to drag any of these frames that are the ones you need into this little animation section right here. So let me find those jumping animations because I'm pretty sure it had some. There appear to be 3 of them right there. 1, 2, 3. So we're going to grab number... Oh, actually, no, there's more. Looks like 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we're going to take all 4 of those and just drag them right into this. And now if I zoom in on DK and I hit this little button to test it, you can see him jumping. It's going really fast. So why don't we go ahead and slow down the sample there. Let's make it... Well, let's try 8. That looks like a good... There you go. It's a little old school pixely looking, but at least you can see him jumping now. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the Animator, and the Animator is what handles all of the different states that your character can be in. So, any animation that it does is usually considered a particular state. If he's standing still, you want a standing animation. If he's walking, you want a walking animation. And so we have all these different little buttons which handle those different states. And there's a bunch of arrows on them because I've already built these, but those arrows are transitions, which tell Unity how to move from one animation to another. So entry is where it starts. And standing, I've made his default animation. So no matter what, it will always start on standing. Now, these little transitions, right here, it would transition from standing to walking. And if you look over here, there's a condition, and that's if walk is true. And the way I got walk is over here, there's a layers tab and a parameters tab. Parameters are variables that are specifically within this animator state machine and control how things are moving within them. So I created a parameter called walk, which is a boolean. It's checking, is DK walking or is he not? I'm going to want to create another one which handles jumping. So I'm going to go ahead, hit that plus sign, and we're going to create a bool because he's either jumping or he's not. And we're going to call that jumping. Actually, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. And jumping is going to start off, you can either check it true or leave it blank, which is false. We're going to start it as false because he's not going to be jumping. We're going to make a transition from both walking to jumping and standing to jumping because he can jump from either position. And if you click those transition arrows, there's conditions and the list is empty. You hit the plus sign, and we're going to change this to jumping, and if jumping is true. And we're going to do that on both of them. So now it can transition from standing to walking or standing to jumping as long as that boolean is true. And also, when it finishes jumping, we're assuming that he's going to go into his standing animation. I mean, he can go into walking right after that, but let's assume he's going to go directly into standing. So we're going to make a transition from jumping back into standing, because he has to get out of his jumping animation somehow. And that transition is going to be if jumping is false. So as soon as he's no longer jumping, head back to standing. It's pretty straightforward. So we have all that nice transitioning now, and we have an animation showing his jump. The problem is, he's not going to do that. There's nothing that's actually going to cause him to change those booleans. So we need to set it up within his code. And if we open up the code that I was writing, I need to switch code real quick because this is still the one from the previous project. This is the player script that I was working on for the test one here. Alright, and I want you to notice a few things. I added one other variable. This one's an animator, and I called it anim. It's just the name I gave it. And then down here in the start area, remember this is what I said activates as soon as the object comes into being? The animator there doesn't have any meaning to it. It's just an empty piece of code, just like the panels that we had right here. So what we actually want to do is we want to assign that animator to this object's animator. So once again, get component, animator will return the animator of the player, and we assign it to that variable. So now we can make changes to the animator within the code. And then down here, moveX is the value that was changing based upon whether or not the player pressed A or D. That was the one for walking. And so all I did is I said if moveX equals 0, then create a block of code, anim.setBool, so that's changing the boolean within the animator, walk was its name, and set it to false. And so that will just make sure that anytime the player is not moving, walk is not active. And then you connect together an if and an else statement. And an else statement runs if the if statement is not true. So if the player is moving, it sets walk to true, which is how my character animates his walking. Now, let's actually build something, because that doesn't really help you out much because that's already built. So we need to activate jumping. So right up here, this is the code that tells you that jumping is happening. So we'll go ahead and say anim.setBool walk, and we'll call that, I'm sorry, not walk, what am I doing? Jumping. And we'll set that to true. Let me double check. Yep, it was called jumping. So now when you jump, it will set the animator bool of jumping to true. Which, if I have thought this out correctly, should work, but it'll create some kind of funny issues here when I start the game. You notice that jump is working, but he's stuck in jump permanently. It just keeps on looping, which is a little strange. So, the reason for that is nothing's changing it back. And a good way to test if he's finished a jump is anytime he collides with the floor again. So remember when we had that code that checked whether or not he was grounded? Let's also have that code set his jumping to false. Alright. And let's see how that's doing now. And it's working correctly. When he jumps, his character flails. When he lands, it stops. And there's a little bit of lag with that. It's because some of his other animations are overlapping. You'll notice he has a standing still animation where he nods his head. There's lots of little fixes that could be made, but the important thing is that it's working. And also, one thing I want you to notice, if I turn the character left and right, he does flip the proper way. On your screens, he's probably not doing that, and that's because there's actually some code that I added in to do that as well. So if you notice right here, I made another Boolean, and I called it facing right, which is up here. facing right starts out as true, because at the beginning of the level, your character is always facing to the right. And then what I said was, well, I created a method down here, which I'll explain in a minute, but the important thing is that the method flips the player the opposite way. So what I said was, if move x is greater than 0, which means that the player is moving to the right, x has a positive number, and if facing right is false. So if the player is moving to the right, but they're facing to the left, then flip them. And the opposite is true as well. If they're moving to the left and facing to the right, flip them. And then down here in the flip code, it's switching the Boolean the opposite way so that the character knows which way they're going. And then it's just taking, well, in this case we're using a vector 3, not a vector 2, although I'm sure you could use a vector 2 if you wanted. But we're creating a new vector 3 called the scale, and we're assigning it to the transform of the player and its local scale, which has to do with, it actually has to do with how big it is, but in this particular case we're not changing its size, we're just changing its positive or negative value, which flips it. And down here it's taking the x value of the scale and it's multiplying it by -1, which will give it either a negative or positive value based upon what it already had. So it's giving it the opposite. And then it's assigning that value back into the transform again. So it's taking whatever the transform scale already is and making its x value negative if it was positive, or positive if it was negative, which flips it on the horizontal axis. So that's what causes it to flip around, like we have here. See? And now we have a fully functional game. I mean, there's really not too much more to it, so that is pretty much everything you guys need to know. So anyways, thanks for watching my explanation of Unity. I hope it helped you guys out, and if you have any more questions, I will be on the chat and I can help you guys out if necessary. Thanks.